Picture this. It's 865 AD within a Danish longhouse, where a messenger has just finished delivering grave news. The room falls into an unnerving silence, but the violence that will follow has already begun to simmer. At the table sit four brothers, the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. Sigurd Snaken the absently holds a small knife, paring his fingernails. As the reality of their father's murder sinks in, he remains impassive, merely continuing to cut. He slices past his nail, down through the skin, reaching the bone of his finger. He feels nothing. Across the table, his brother Bjorn Ironside grips a chess piece carved from bone. His hold tightens and a sharp crack reverberates as the piece fractures in his fist, driving shards into his palm as blood begins to drip rhythmically onto the wooden board. This isn't grief. This is a declaration of war. This marks the moment when the revenge of the Great Heathen Army commences. Before delving into these tales of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering hidden truths of history, consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more content like this. I'd love to hear from you in the comments about where you're listening from. It's remarkable how we explore these ancient stories together, connected across time and space through our shared interest in the past. To grasp this fierce reaction, one must understand the provocation. The messengers confirmed that King Ælla of Northumbria hadn't merely executed Ragnar. He had tortured him, throwing the legendary Viking into a pit of vipers for a slow, humiliating death, stripped of armor and dignity. Ælla intended to showcase that Ragnar was just a man, yet with his final breath, Ragnar laughed at his killer. Amid the venom coursing through him, he uttered one last prophecy. How the little piglets would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffered. King Ælla believed he had extinguished a threat. Instead, he ignited a fire. He forgot that the old boar had sons, and those piglets were now among the most fearsome warlords in Europe. The reaction in Denmark was swift. No tears were shed, only mobilization. Sigurd withdrew his knife, Bjorn wiped the blood from his hand, and they sent out a call that reverberated across the Viking world. This wouldn't be a typical raid for silver or slaves. This was a mission with a singular, brutal intent: extermination. Warriors flocked to their banner from Norway, Sweden, and Ireland. Old rivalries were set aside, and mercenaries willingly fought for free just to participate. They were all drawn by the size of their target. King Ælla thought himself secure in his stone fortress across the sea, unaware that he had summoned a force unlike anything England had ever witnessed. The Great Heathen Army was arising, driven to ensure that every person connected to Ragnar's death would face a gruesome fate. In late 865 AD, sentries on the coast of East Anglia peered out at the horizon, and what they saw stopped their hearts. Typically, a Viking alarm meant 3 or 5 longships, swift hit-and-run raiders. But today, the horizon itself appeared to be moving, with hundreds of dragon-headed ships cutting through the mist. This was not merely a raiding party. It was a floating city, a migration of death. Historians call it the Great Heathen Army, while the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle simply refers to it as the Maxilhir. The Great Host, it wasn't solely warriors, there were smiths, women, children, and horses. They weren't here to plunder silver and leave. They came to seize land, raise crops, and dismantle the kingdoms of England piece by piece. Leading this immense force was not the mightiest brother, Bjorn, nor the most stoic, Sigurd, but the cripple, Ivar the Boneless. For centuries, historians have debated the meaning behind his title. Was it a brittle bone disease? A physical inability to walk? Or a metaphor for his uncanny flexibility in combat? The sagas suggest he was often carried into battle on a shield. But make no mistake, Ivar was the mastermind. While his brothers bristled with rage, Ivar operated with cold, calculated cruelty. He knew that to eliminate a king like Ælla, one required not only axes but also strategy. Realizing Northumbria was too strong to assault directly from the sea, Ivar made a move that baffled everyone. Instead of sailing directly towards Ælla, he landed his vast fleet in East Anglia and bypassed his target. Why? Because Ivar was playing the long game. He terrorized the locals of East Anglia not into rebellion but submission. He demanded horses and transformed his seafaring infantry into a mounted cavalry. He spent the winter gathering intelligence, sharpening weapons, and allowing the fear he instilled to drift north like a plague. He let King Ælla wait, letting dread build in anticipation. Ever understood that the fear of impending pain can often be worse than the pain itself. By the time the snow melted in 866, the Great Heathen Army had evolved from a mere horde of enraged Vikings into a professional war machine, mounted, supplied, and ruthless. Their focus shifted northward. Those little piglets were no longer grunting. It was time to hunt the boar. As the Great Heathen Army honed their axes in East Anglia, the kingdom of Northumbria was collapsing from within, caught in the throes of a bitter civil war. The usurper, King Ælla, the man responsible for Ragnar's death, was locked in a struggle against the rightful king, Osbert. They were so consumed by their mutual hatred that they completely overlooked the shadow that loomed in the south. Civil war can be a gift to an invader, and Ivar the Boneless was ready to accept it. In the autumn of 866 AD, Ivar launched his offensive. He marched his army north, utilizing the horses they had extorted from the East Anglians. They advanced with terrifying swiftness, bypassing smaller villages and targeting the heart of the north, the ancient Roman city of York. But Ivar didn't merely select the target. He meticulously chose the time as well. He waited for November 1st, All Saints' Day. Consider the brilliance of this tactic on All Saints' Day. The entire noble class, military commanders, and bishops would gather inside their cathedrals. They would be unarmed, distracted, and immersed in prayer, expecting a feast and divine protection. What they received instead was the heathen army. The Vikings struck York while the church bells still rang. The city's defenses were manned by skeleton crews, and the gates were breached before the Northumbrian leaders could finish their hymns. What unfolded was not a battle. It was a massacre within a sanctuary. When the sun set on All Saints' Day, the capital of the north lay in ruins. Yet, Ivar didn't burn York to the ground. That would be the act of a common raider. Instead, he occupied it. He repaired the Roman walls, stocked the granaries, and transformed York into a Viking stronghold deep within enemy territory. Ivar envisioned that the fall of York would force his foes to cease squabbling amongst themselves. He calculated that Ælla and Osbert would be compelled to unite. Why hunt the mice when you could set out cheese and wait for them to spring into your trap? It took 4 long months for the Northumbrians to swallow their pride, watching a heathen army thrive in their capital, consuming their resources and mocking their deities. Finally, in March 867 AD, King Ælla and his rival Osbert extended their hands in truce, merging their forces into one massive army. It became a crusade before the term was even conceived. They marched on York convinced that divine favor was on their side, prepared to drive the pagans back into the sea. On March 21st, Palm Sunday, the Northumbrians launched their assault. Initially, it appeared to be a success. They slammed into the ancient Roman walls of York with the ferocity of desperate men, discovering gaps in the defenses and breaking through the gates. A cheer rose from the English ranks as they poured into the city streets, thousands of them inundating the narrow alleyways of York, believing they had the Vikings on the run. But they did not comprehend their adversary. Ivar the Boneless hadn't lost control of the walls. He had willingly relinquished them. As soon as the bulk of the Northumbrian army squeezed into the narrow, twisting streets of the city, the trap sprung shut. Vikings emerged on the rooftops from side streets and locked shields at both ends of the main avenues, transforming York into a claustrophobic spiral of death. The advantage of numbers evaporated. In the confines of urban combat, the long spears of the English levies became ineffective. It devolved into a brutal brawl of axes and knives, and panic ensued as the Northumbrians found themselves jammed together, unable to swing their weapons as they were butchered where they stood. King Osbert, the rightful heir, fought valiantly but was overwhelmed in the chaos, his body trampled in the mud of the city he fought to defend. The crusade had devolved into slaughter. Amid the carnage, the Vikings had sneaky orders. One man was to remain unharmed. The sons of Ragnar scanned the battlefield, searching for one specific crown. King Ælla, witnessing his army disband, saw his rival meet his end. In dawning horror, he recognized that the walls he just breached had become his prison. As he attempted to withdraw, he found his escape blocked by a wall of Danish shields. Surrounded, he was dragged from his horse, stripped of his weapons, and forced to kneel in the bloody dirt. The Battle of York was over, and silence enveloped the city, broken only by the groans of the dying. The Vikings did not execute Ælla on the spot that would have shown mercy. Instead, they bound him in chains, looking upon him not with anger, but with ominous anticipation. The war was now concluded. The ritual was about to unfold. The Great Hall of York had witnessed many kings, but it had never seen a trial like this. Ælla was dragged into the center, covered in mud and blood, his royal garments tattered, his crown long gone. Around him stood the victorious chieftains of the Great Heathen Army, but Ælla's eyes fixated on the four men seated at the dais, the sons of Ragnar. Bjorn Ironside, with his massive arms crossed, regarded Ælla as a butcher would inspect meat. Ubba toyed with his axe's handle. Sigurd Snake in the eye stared with an unsettling focus. Yet, it was Eivor the Boneless who commanded the room's terror, reclining on a mound of furs, his twisted legs useless, but his eyes igniting with cold, reptilian intelligence. This moment signaled the culmination of the prophecy. Ælla recognized them not as mere piglets, but as wolves. Accounts do not provide a precise transcript of the proceedings, yet sagas reveal the intimate horror. Eivor did not scream. He did not vent rage. He likely spoke softly, inquiring about the pit. He would have asked about the snakes, desperately wanting to know. Did my father cry out? Did he beg? How long did it take for the venom to stop beating in his heart? Each query was akin to twisting a knife deeper. Eivor made Ælla relive his crime, forcing him to accept that he had slain a hero without honor. Ælla had denied Ragnar a weapon for a dignified death. Now Eivor would deny him a swift end. In Viking code, a clean death, a decapitation, or a well-placed sword strike represented mercy and respect. But Ælla had forfeited that right. He was not a prisoner of war. He was a criminal who had breached sacred laws. There would be no ransom negotiation, no offer of exile. Eivor signaled his guards, not directing Ælla to a dungeon, but bringing him out to a nearby hill. The time for conversation was over. The sons of Ragnar had devised a punishment that would resonate through history and execution methods so horrifying that scholars have doubted its very possibility for centuries. They prepared the ground for the Blood Eagle. The location was likely a high ridge, visible to both the Viking army and the terrified survivors of York. King Ælla was forced onto his stomach, his hands and feet anchored into the earth, stretching him taut. He was no longer a king, but a canvas for Eivor's dark artistry. The Blood Eagle, or Blodden in Old Norse, is perhaps the most notorious execution method in human history. For a long time, it was dismissed as myth, a tale crafted to scare children. But for King Ælla on that bleak Northumbrian afternoon, it was agonizingly real. The executioner, possibly Eivor himself or a skilled operative chosen for his precision, approached with a long knife. This was no reckless hacking. It was art. First, Ælla's back was sliced open. Two long, curved cuts were made along his spine, from shoulder blades down to his lower back. The skin was peeled back like paper, revealing the red muscle and white ribcage beneath. At this moment, Ælla would have screamed, an agonizing cry that ravaged his throat as his consciousness lingered cruelly. Next came the hammer and chisel, the defining moment of the torture. The executioner did not simply cut, he deconstructed. One by one, the ribs were severed from the spine. Crack, 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 the sound of snapping bones ringing out across the silent field. The ribs were forcefully bent outward, transforming into wings. This man was being turned inside out. But the ritual was far from over. With the chest cavity exposed to the elements, the executioner reached inside. The final act entailed pulling the lungs from the chest and draping them over the broken ribs. As the lungs collapsed and the victim's final ragged breaths fluttered through the torn chest, they appeared to mimic wings beating, the bloody eagle striving to escape from the wreckage of a man's body. Medical experts opine today that Ælla likely perished from traumatic shock or pneumothorax, the collapse of lungs before the process concluded entirely. But the Vikings believed that if the victim uttered a sound during this horror, he would be barred from Valhalla. Ælla screamed. He died not as a warrior, but as a sacrifice to Odin, his body grotesquely transformed into a symbol of Viking supremacy. When the act was complete, Ælla's remains were left behind, a stark warning to all the other kings in England. The debt was repaid, the old boar had been avenged. As the sons of Ragnar cleaned the blood from their hands, they prepared for the next chapter of their story.